And you're still continuing to get lots of new growth in this setup during the winter. I mean, it's the middle of December here, the end of December, and look at this. You can see all the growth here, and we're actually pruning off quite a bit.
So yeah, why don't you show me, Paul? Earlier we were talking about how you would deal with this once it's gotten to the top. I've got one node coming out over here.
Okay.
So that's got a top node.
So I would leave that. I would probably leave this one. And in this case, honestly, I would probably pull this one, leave this one, and alternate them. So keep that, pull this, and you're best off kind of alternating, so that way you get more airflow into here, because this is just too many new branches.
Yeah, so take this one
so
off,
I take
this one off.
Yep, and I think that's better if you're really trying to channel the energy.
Now, would you take another one off down here so I get, or you think we're high enough that I should?
I would probably leave that one, but it doesn't matter, to be honest with you. But I would leave it just because I think it would be nice to try to channel its energy in that direction. Well, explain. You had some problems with fungal issues, correct?
So this is actually just like your normal cactus rust or CVX or whatever that is. But if you go to the that fly was slow. If you go to the next one over, I think it's a Zamorano or Flora. You can see these little black areas. These were all like really active fungal growths.
Right down in here.
And what had happened was I closed off the greenhouse completely. There was no ventilation. Except for maybe out the doors on the ends. And then we were running misters because it was still getting 105 in here in the daytime. Okay. So when we were running misters, what was happening is it got super humid in here, which was kind of still doing okay. I was getting a little bit more of the like red spots on things. Like
a little bit more cactus rust.
Yeah. So when it got humid, that's when the sort of virusy stuff started showing up.
And that was a lot of this black.
Well, that didn't know. It was actually, it wasn't until it got cold.
That's what happened.
And once it got cold, all this mold grew. So I called my pest control advisor, who works for us for citrus, and I said, here's this mold. It's growing out like crazy. I don't want it on my plants. What can I do? And he gave me a product called Oxidate. And it's more or less, if you look at the active ingredient, it's more or less like a 97 USP hydrogen peroxide.
So it's basically peroxide.
Yeah. Okay. So I diluted that one to 100. Okay. No, I think it might have been like a quart to 100 gallons. Like
so it was
very dilute. And then I put it in a backpack sprayer, and this whole thing, it took me probably like 6 gallons total for this whole thing. But I just soaked those things up and down, and I got every piece. And by the next day, it was all black.
It turned black like this on my finger.
Yeah, just like that.
I pulled off a piece.
I think I might have some regrowing because it's gotten cold again.
Yeah, I've seen some.
It looks like a little fuzzy right here. That looks active. It's actually dying off some, so
but
I wonder
it's growing on the sap, right?
Yeah,
it grows the sap off of the nodes.
I never noticed this when they were outside. When they were outside in the heat, I never noticed that sap bubble coming out ever at all. So I'm wondering if that has to do with humidity, because where it's more humid and where I'm giving it a little bit more water once I got them planted,
and the colder weather, right? So it's kind of that.
Well, no, it was as soon as I planted them in here that I started seeing sap. And I thought there was a pest because we have walnut husk flies in here. And I didn't see it until after I started seeing walnut husk flies in here.
So you planted them in the soil, you started watering them, you noticed more sap.
More sap, yeah. And so I thought what was happening is that walnut husk fly is a sucking bug. It's got a piercing part.
Okay.
So I thought maybe it was eating in here and then opening that up, and then the sap was coming out. So it was actually just yesterday that you told me the sap was okay, that I stopped worrying about it. I've been both worrying about it, and my father is just a really thorough farmer, so his thing is like, if there's a problem, we got to fix it today. And that's why how we saved these from this mold here is we found it, we got the Oxidate the next day, and we sprayed it right away.
And having the ventilation, because now that you have ventilation, you can see, look at how healthy this growth is. I mean, it's beautiful growth, especially this time of year. If you're growing outdoors, you're not going to see this in Southern California. So the growth of these new branches, I mean, look at them all. Every branch you see is just really, really healthy. Look at this growth.
Well, and we should probably...
And we still have that mold, though, so that's the only thing, but it's not active.
But it's not active anymore,
And you only sprayed it once?
One spray, yeah.
One spray. So
one spray, and then got the fans installed. Now, this one got some bad rust on it. I was worried for a minute.
Yeah, it's turning black, though. When it's black, that's a good sign. That means it's not active. When it's really rusty color, that's a bad sign.
Well, what I learned at the Pattaya Festival, if that's to be trusted, which I would assume it is,
I hope so.
is with a lot of these diseases, you just have to outgrow them.
Yep.
You got to keep your plants healthy enough and keep them on enough nutrition.
Yep.
And so we're not watering a ton right now just because there hasn't been any sun and it hasn't been warming up in here at all. But we've started actually injecting like your Miller 20-20-20 fertilizer. So we don't know exactly how we're going to fertilize them and put the regimen on yet. There's a couple papers I've looked at, one from India, one from Israel, and I think one from Vietnam, that talk about what time of year to put on what amounts of fertilizer in what ratios. And so I want to use that as a basis point, like a jumping off point. And then I'll probably start with like a third of that, but put it in liquid fertilizers with the water.
Okay.
So then what I'll do is I'll be injecting at a ratio or mixing it in my tank, and then when our water tank turns on, there's actually an agitator in there.
Okay.
So I can mix in advance, and then it'll just deliver out the water with the pre-mixed nutrients in it.
Now, have you seen the UC article on the macro and micronutrients? They did do an experiment.
No, I
So
haven't.
I'll put the link. The link's in the description below, and I'll send it to you as well. So that will
I can't
help.
wait to read that.
Yeah.
That's going to be
So
really good.
they
I've been
actually
looking for
need
the actual.
NPK at different times.
Yeah, well, that's
So
the
that
one. That's
was
the
good.
one out of Israel came up,
Yeah.
or the one out of India came up with. But theirs was for the impact on fruiting, and the most production of fruit and the best size of fruit. I think there's a lot of space to learn, not only what fertilizers these things want, but when they want them. And you'll find, just in general with plants, their physiological needs differ based on season and based on what the plant's releasing different hormones at different times of the year, and those hormones code what nutrients it wants to uptake. And so if you give the plant exactly the ratios of things it wants to uptake, it's not having to be selective about what it's uptaking. And it's not going to uptake too much of something to the detriment of something else. Like in our citrus trees, we actually, this last year, us and then the company that my dad works for has been pulling a leaf sample every year or every month of the entire year, so we can build a graph of if we go out in the field and look at what looks like the healthiest looking block over the time, and then we match that to what was the nutrients in there. So then we have a target for what to test the biomass to every time of the year. And we know in March, I want my nitrogen to be at a 4.4, and in April, I want it to be at a 4.2, and in May, I want it to be at a 3. And then we can map the levels, the percentages of biomass that is nitrogen, potassium, and then it even does micronutrients as well.
So they basically formulate a perfect, optimal conditions for the plant to do its best.
Well, but also a way for you to get a litmus test and find a problem before it happens.
Okay.
Because something may look good, but it may have used up all its nitrogen reserves, and it's not going to be able to throw good buds this year. So you might have a beautiful, long, leggy vegetative growth, and then you find that you just used up all your nitrogen, and there's not more available in the soil, and the plant doesn't have reserves anymore because it just spent it all on this brand new expensive leg extension. It looks really pretty, but now it's not going to be fruitful this year. And so we want to sort of build our baselines. If I were to take a piece of new growth and a piece of old mature growth, and I were to sample those, which one's going to have more nutrients? Which one's going to have more nitrogen in it? I don't know any of that yet, but we want to build up a baseline of that over time, and use that baseline to then actively be messing with our fertigation to figure out what exactly does this plant need, and more importantly, when does it need it.